I was watching the Gaga documentary on Netflix. Someone mentioned it, and I still have conflicting feelings about watching stuff about the music industry and rock stars because it takes me back, and I've always had that um, ambivalent feeling about it. I knew that I wanted to work in the music industry when I was 12. I went to my first gig, and it was something revolutionary because it's not something you do or you aim or you consider real from where I come from. In Italy, there is a. I don't know if it's in Italy in general, if it was in my family, but you don't take these things seriously. You're just having your head in the clouds if you want to do anything that it's not a proper job. I was very much ridiculed, and honestly, looking back, I don't know what made me hang in there, considering how much my mother ridiculed me having these crazy ideas instead of just getting, a job. The main factory that there is in my hometown makes bottle tops, and I remember that the main aim for people living there, or at least for what my mother told me, was to get a job in there. That was job security. That was what to aim for. But I never had time to get in there because I saw my first gig when I was 12 and I saw that kind of world. And I remember the thing that I kept telling myself was, well, other people's are doing it. It means that there is a way to do it. They're just people like me. I don't know where this concept came from for me, to be honest, but that's what I always uh, that's what always made me hang on to that. It's funny because I was talking to my husband yesterday about different thing, about specifically how I've tried to take YouTube seriously in the last 6 months, trying to make this my career. I am 34 years old, whether I look it or not. So I don't necessarily feel old or even much an adult, but because of the things that I remember and the things that I've gone through, that time is indeed there. Um, I moved to London, which was probably my first real dipping into the adult world. I got my first job. It's coming to 10 years now. Literally in a couple of weeks, it's going to be 10 years. And I was bringing to him the natural self-doubt that I suppose growing up in Italy or growing up with my mother, I don't know which one of the two, or maybe both, gave me, which was, oh, you shouldn't aim for things that is just having clouds in your head. In Italy, we say having crickets in your head. Because, it's I don't know, is it a waste of time? Is it wasting other people's time? I'm not quite sure. But then my husband reminded me of that head sculpture, head piece, the sculpture that Mussolini had in his own office uh, during the Fascist era then in Italy, which actually is not just the Second World War, but actually it's from after the first one onwards, which basically tried to push the general culture to aim low and be practical and actual. And basically, there was no concept of follow your dreams, but do anything that right now is not useful to your country. And what your country needs is not for you to have crickets in your head, but for you to be useful and just put your hands at the work that your country needs. So I don't know. Maybe it's actually right, and that's why, at least from where I come from, it's never been seen as something worth pursuing. I don't think one person that knew me as a child actually knows what I do for a living now. Not that I know much of it, but before the turnaround of the last few years, um, I had a very easy answer for people who would listen or understand what I was doing. And what I was doing was working in the music industry. I was, I, I, I think what happened was that when I went to that first gig, I, I had a glimpse of something that had no resemblance to anything that I lived with. Come from a farmer's family, loved my grandparents to death. My mother wasn't as good, unfortunately, but it was a very simple, very down-to-earth life, and seeing that something that big that could project itself to so many different parts of the existence of the world in a way, and still being able to touch it, to me was something amazing. I think the bringing down of barriers in distance was something amazing. And I wanted to be part of it. And then when I started to spend more time thinking about it, I realized that what I actually wanted was to be part of the process that would bring that kind of thing to people that were in very small realities like I was at the time, so that it could make them see that even if they have told you all this time that that's all you can aim for and all you should aim for, it's not. I think the reason I wanted to be part of that, and I wanted to be close to artists. Um, it's funny because a lot of people always took it as, you're a girl who wants to work into the music industry, you must be a groupie. I never actually realized that closeted sexism has always been there, because you know what? I was lucky enough not to grow up pretty, so that was never an issue for me. Nobody would have seen me that way, and I've never considered it that way either. But what I wanted was to connect with people who possibly thought closer to the way I think than all the people that I had grown up with. Uh, it's it was me looking for kindred spirits, and I suppose at the time I was thinking more than other kind of artists, whether it's actors or novelists or things like that. Um, a musician puts his own heart and his own feelings in songs, or at least at the time I thought this, before going into the split of, oh, life experience versus storytelling. But before getting there, I was like, you get access to the inner world of someone that you don't know and you can't touch, but because it brings down the barriers and the distance, if I find this way someone whose way to recount those feelings is similar to mine, then hey, maybe there is someone that is more similar to me and I'm not just the one weirdo. I think that's the reason why people get attached to music at all, to begin with. I just took it slightly more seriously, I suppose, and then went on to decide I wanted to work in the music industry. But then I was watching the documentary and I realized I might have thought things wrong at the time. And to be honest, considering where I was coming from, that was distance enough. Like, I went a lot of distance to do what I've done already. But hey, I started off working in the music industry, and now I try to make a living out of making food. So clearly something went wrong there. Did it? It didn't go wrong. And I don't blame it on the world that I was part of and that for a time accepted me, which was amazing. I blame it on the fact that I might have aimed for the wrong thing the whole time. I remember my mother tried to, I don't think at the time I took it as put it down, but my mother tried to put me down so much with the idea of being an artist, being part of the... And at the beginning I wanted to be a singer. Ha! I managed to get a keyboard. I was trying to write songs. I can honestly admit now that I don't think I had that much talent, but I don't know that even if saying this, it's actually that side of my mother putting me down that convinced me of that, because, oh no, that's never about talent anyway. It's always about who you know and who you sleep with, and you don't want to get into that dirty world and da da da. So I think my justification was, well, if I get into the backstage part, half of it might still be luck or who I know, but half of it's stuff that I can learn, that I can study, that I can apply myself to, and that I can do. I'm more than happy to dedicate myself to that, which is why I spent my high school doing computer studies. I thought that doing website would have been enough, and then I started to do websites, and I realized I don't want to stay behind the desk. I want to be there with them. And so I went on doing communication studies. I tried to be part of productions so that I could be. I was really fascinated with the study and semiotics of music videos. So at the time I was in uni, I was lucky enough to have a professor that was a music video director. So I got a glimpse there as well. And then I moved here. And my first job, actually before I moved here, 6 months before, my first job was at MTV in Italy, which I might very well be the only person who didn't get in just because they knew someone. I did something that in Italy doesn't happen, which is literally send a copy of my CV to HR@MTV. And it is true that in Italy you really need to know people. Most of the companies, at least at the time, didn't even list vacancies. That's not how it worked. You knew about a vacancy because you knew someone in, and da da da. And I just sent my CV, and I think 2 months later, not even, I got called, and then I got the job. And again, from experience and from what everybody that I knew and worked there even told me, never before, never again. So I attribute that to fate. And I was really humbled, and everything that I touched, I knew that had the potential, that had that much potential to then reach someone else that was in my same position. So that was why I wanted to be part of it. But back to the reason why I thought this was finally an excuse to make the first video for this channel, which is the personal side of me, is that in the documentary, Gaga keeps on talking about Mark. And then I realized that the Mark she was talking about was Mark Ronson, and it clicked in my head, because Mark Ronson was the first musician, artist that I interviewed while in my first role at MTV. I was an intern at the time, and I was an intern in the department that interviewed all the international artists. I got the job because I knew English, basically, I think, but also because my manager at the time, the person that became my manager at the time, Bianca, I think she saw in me the fact that I had a genuine aim, but I also was innocent enough to have no idea what was going on. And I think she took a chance on me, thinking, well, if you might be too naive and you might not be strong enough, but it's not for me to decide. And if you can hold on while doing your job by the not matching expectations, which is not necessarily disappointment, but it's that, then that's up to you. That's your own strength. And I went on that road for almost 10 years. I loved what I did, but I knew that I was still the only one thinking the way that I was. And probably the mistake was that I wasn't meant to be backstage, because those are still very technical and practical people, which is lovely, which is very to the point. But then I realized that there was a level of sensitivity that wasn't met, sometimes, most of the times, and I was still aiming to talk and deal with those people who, if they didn't write songs about them, would have just been considered oversensitive like I was. Um, and I am glad that I had the chance to get close to some of those people and be part of the world and have them taking me being part of their world as human beings at some point. I was really grateful of that. That mostly happened when I actually then worked on Gin in Teacups, but yeah, that was a different thing, and I'm sorry it took me so long to realize it, because maybe if I had aimed to be a talent, an artist myself, it would have been easier to get to those kindred spirits. Um, I don't know what this got me so emotional. Uh, but yeah, I feel like this is the most relevant background that one can start off knowing me if one should care to do so. And that's the general basics. But there's also the... Actually, it's more than 10 years. 10 years ago, I started working in this. But again, this all started when I was 12. That was 95. That was 22 years ago. So the story goes on for much longer than one would think. And the problem is, when then something bad happens, my natural way to handle the impact of bad things to me is going to oblivion. And I realize that I already have sort of black spots and blackouts in my memories when they are connected to something that now is seen as a bad memory. And I don't want to lose the memories of the last 22 years and the things that were connected to them. So I suppose this is also a good excuse to put them into a way that can be remembered. I think it's enough to start with. But yeah, I wasn't always meant to make food. I love making food, but I never expected it to have to be taken as seriously as I am now, because I had completely different vision and expectations and aims. That's why it also took me so long to actually take it seriously, because to me it was the side hobby, and I wasn't a foodie. I was, well, the last thing that I was, thank God, was a music editor. I was picking talent. I was listening to music. I was getting to know as close as possible people that might have been understanding the world the same way that I did.